Okay, we are live.
Okay.
Good afternoon. It is Friday, September the 30th. We're at the Bellevue Veterans Center and interviewing Pete Gill about his Vietnam service. Pete, how did you end up in the military?
Well, my brother was drafted back in '66, and he went to Nam, and he came back. And he came back in '67 when I was a freshman in high school, and I had I had romanced the idea of going into the military, and was kind of proud of him. So I was looking at going into the Marines, and he jumped on my butt like you wouldn't believe. No, you're not going Marines. He goes, if anything, you're going Air Force. And of course, Larry was the first one in our family that went service. So to me, at the time, one branch was equal to the other as far as I was concerned. And when I first opposed to it, he got my mother, my father, and my other brothers. I'm the fourth of 5 boys, no girls, all to get on my case to join the Air Force. And his reason for me to join the Air Force was so I wouldn't end up in Vietnam. He said, and that was his big thing, because he had spent a year there. And so he still has, I believe to this day, the letter I wrote the day I arrived in Da Nang thanking him for that advice. So that's how I ended up in the military and in the Air Force. So.
Where did you go for training?
Off at Lake Lackland Air Force Base down in San Antonio, Texas. And then everything else was OJT. On the job training.
And what was your specialty?
Well, basically, I actually went in clerical at first, but I got into a wild weasel outfit, and they needed a third person, a dummy, so to speak, to help load the AGMs. And so I volunteered because I didn't want to work inside. So I ended up working on the flight line, being the idiot that kind of held things to make sure it didn't drop. So.
Okay, now you're going to have to explain what a weasel and an AGM are.
Oh, okay. An AGM is an air-to-ground missile that basically attaches to the plane, and they use it to bomb surface-to-air missile sites, SAM sites. A wild weasel, technically, I think they say it flies low-level suppression mission to hide the high-level bombers flying overhead, so that the sites can't pick them up. But what the pilots would always joke about is it's a fighter plane that plays chicken with a surface-to-air missile site, and they'll go down and they taunt to be shot at, and then they play chicken with the SAM, the surface-to-air missile, and at the same time, as soon as they get, because of the radar that it gives off for launching that missile, they pick up on that spot, and that's when they shoot their AGM down at it.
So were you on the plane when it was actually flying?
No.
You just loaded it?
No, it was a 2-man F-105 fighter jet, and I was just on the crew that made sure it left with all the stuff it was supposed to have on it.
How long were you in the service before you actually went to Vietnam?
Before I went, I was in the service two years when I went. Actually, what happened was I was in the service roughly 2 years when I went to Korat, Thailand. No, that's not right. I was in the service a year when I went to Korat, Thailand, and it was from there I went 2 weeks TDY to Da Nang. Okay, so I only spent 2 weeks in Vietnam, but I was there.
Okay.
And so just a little over a year, actually.
From Thailand, though, did you have Vietnam-related experiences?
Not really. I mean, quite frankly, like I say, I wasn't a weed beater. I was not beating the weeds or doing any of that stuff. And I felt quite protected, and it wasn't because they were making sure I was protected. They were making sure that $200,000 piece of equipment I was standing next to was protected. So as long as that was there, I knew I was okay. And just the the fact of being a 19-year-old kid in Vietnam, not knowing what the heck's going on from day to day, and a little bit of anxiety with that, especially if there was, bombs exploding or shooting happening on the perimeter, and you could hear it where we were at. You're always kind of worried about it, but I didn't have any real experiences that the other people can talk about.
So you went in right out of high school?
Exactly. I in Buffalo, New York. We graduated in June, and I went in August.
So, and you were pretty late in the war.
Yeah, I tell everybody, and I had somebody just within the last week tell me that I'm incorrect, but for years I've been telling people that I'm one of the youngest Vietnam vets you'll ever meet. I'm 69 years old, and if somebody says they're 68, they may be telling the truth. But if they're 67, they're lying through their teeth. Just within the last week, Monday, as a matter of fact, a member of a group that meets on Monday nights, he informed me that I was there in 72, and he knows people who were there in 74. So apparently I may not be the youngest one, but I'm the youngest one I know of. So most Vietnam vets right now are 74, 73 to 74, or a little higher.
So going that late, what was the reaction of your classmates, friends?
I went to a Catholic high school because I was supposed to be a priest. I'm the fourth of five boys, as I mentioned. My mother was Italian. My dad was raised in a Catholic orphanage. All three of my brothers, all four of my brothers, three older ones and the younger one, went to public school, but Pete was going to be a priest, so he went to a seminary in prep. I took 18 religion courses in 4 years. Unfortunately, me going into the service was a disappointment to my parents. They never knew I was in Vietnam. They always knew I was in Thailand. My brother, who was in Vietnam a few years beforehand, he's the only one I told that I was actually there, and asked him not to tell anybody. So there was never really any reaction one way or another, as long as they thought I was in Thailand. Of course, that being in Southeast Asia, you live in the States here, it was all the same conglomerate. So they were a little concerned, but my brother assured them that being in Thailand, they didn't have to worry about me. So Larry was the pro from Dover as far as that went, so they listened to him.
What about, say, friends and classmates, going into the military at that time when it wasn't so popular?
Well, that's true.
Did you get any negativity?
No, because I let it be known from an early age. Larry was in, as a freshman, I kind of said I was going to the service, and I was planning on going in after ordination originally and become a priest in the military, was my original plans. But as I realized I wasn't going to be, sophomore year is when I realized I wasn't going to be a priest. And that's when Larry started working on me to make sure I went into the right branch. But no, it was kind of this is what I'm going to do, and people accepted it. When I went home for Christmas, the very first Christmas that I was in Chicago, I happened to meet two classmates who had enlisted in the Air Force just like a month or two after I did. So it was kind of like there was a little bit of a group there. But no, from classmates, no, of the three guys that I hung around with most in high school, one went into the Army, the other one became a doctor, and the other one, nobody knows where they are now. But the Army guy and I can't remember what it's called. Military had it was like an 800 line wax or something like that. I can't remember what it was called, but we used to call each other all the time. Where he was stationed at and where I was stationed at. So.
What about your other service? Was there anything unique about the other places you were besides your Vietnam?
Yeah, well, stateside, basically when I was stateside I did more clerical, but I did occasionally go out to the flight line because I had that experience. But after I was in the service for 2 years, we were a tenant unit on a SAC base, and they moved that unit to George Air Force Base. I was at McConnell Air Force Base. And at that time they said, Gill, you don't need to go with them. You want to stay here, or you want to go to, I think it was Davis Mountain or something like that in South Carolina or something like that. And I said I'd rather stay here. So I ended up going into the SAC unit, and they put me in a unit called Social Actions. I had no idea what it was, but I ended up becoming a little bit of on-the-job training and all that, and eventually I became what they called an equal opportunity investigator. I did that for my last 2 years, a little over 2 years of service. So, and that was fun.
Did you do that then as a civilian?
No, when I got out of the service, I went into restaurant management, and then from restaurant management, I went to school and went into business management, became an accountant, and worked as an accountant for quite a few years, and then I got tired of working at a desk. I never really did like working inside, and had a siding and roofing company for many years until I fell off a roof. And it don't bounce that well when you're 40 years old, and I went to work for the post office. And even though I went to work for the post office with the intention that I might become a carrier, but my driving, you had to have a 5-year perfect driving record, but I was 3 months shy of that. So they said, you go work inside and be a clerk, and after 18 months you can transfer to being a carrier. And after 18 months I realized I liked the air conditioning and heating better than being outside. So I ended up doing 25 years as a clerk.
Did your military experience have an impact on that postal career?
In all honesty, it did in a way. A lot of the terms the post office use, they don't use shifts, it's chores. And if you don't call in, it's not considered a no-call, no-show. You're called an AWOL. So a lot of people who didn't have military didn't understand a lot of the things they were saying. But if anything that I think the military taught me, and I think I might have been that way before I went in, is just shut up and do it. It doesn't matter where you work. There's always going to be some BS, and everybody's going to complain. But, almost any job you've got here is better than flipping hamburgers at McDonald's. So just be quiet and do the work and get out of here, And I think my military, because, in the military, you can go on strike all you want in the military. Yeah, right. So I think that if anything, the military taught me just to shut up and do it. Dig your feet in and get it done.
When you got out of the service, I'm bouncing here. When you got out of the service, did you encounter any negativity for people who knew you'd been in the service? Or when you came back from overseas?
Actually, whenever there was times, even in Wichita, Kansas, wearing the uniform off base, occasionally. I mean, it wasn't, because Wichita, Kansas is definitely more of a conservative base than Buffalo, New York, or California or any place like that would be. But there was a few idiots that wanted to make fun. And back then I wasn't the chubby little guy you see now. Back then I was pretty well buff, and I was going to the gym 4 or 5 days a week. And I encouraged it sometimes, just because I'm an antagonistic type. I'll admit I'm an antagonistic type person. Example of that is soccer. When my kids were playing soccer and I play soccer, I intentionally became a referee because I knew referees are hated. And come on, bring it on, So if somebody gets in my face, I don't back down.
Did you encounter any of those kind of experiences in the military?
not in the military, but in the civilian community outside, yes, there was a couple of times. I was in a couple, I'm not gonna say fights, let's just say mild skirmishes where somebody starts pushing and, you know, they don't expect to be pushed back, and once you start pushing back, it's like, oh, oh, oh. So, but yeah, I never really got into a real fight, so to speak. So.
Are you still in communication with any of your military friends or buddies?
One I am. I went to visit him. He lives in Dallas, and I went to visit him last October. Him and his wife are doing real good. His wife was my wife's roommate in nurses training, and Dave and I basically hung around a lot because of that. The one guy that I probably hung around with most and stayed in contact the most, he passed away a little over a year ago.
Oh, sorry to hear that. Are you in touch with anybody you were in Da Nang with?
No. One guy that I was at, well, I guess there's two guys in the military, but Dave, this guy, I didn't really keep in touch with him much after the unit moved to George, but there is one guy I was in Karat with that I sometimes, we're Facebook friends, in that aspect.
What about military reunions or, unit reunions? Do you ever participate, or like Facebook groups or things like that?
Yes, my unit, the Wild Weasel unit, they had a reunion about 4 or 5 years ago. But every time they have a reunion, it's in Las Vegas. And for some reason, well, at the last reunion, my wife was still around, and I was her caregiver. And I didn't make that reunion, and I had the ones beforehand. Really, the unit, I didn't start getting in touch with them until about 10 years ago. I found them on Facebook, and then I started getting in touch with them. And they had 2 reunions since then, and both were in Vegas, and I couldn't go. If they had another one like this year or next year in Vegas, I'd probably go to it. That one wouldn't be a problem. My wife was sick the last 5 years she was around, so I couldn't do that. But yeah, the Nebraska Vietnam Veterans has a reunion every year in August. And if you look at the first 5 programs to that, you'll see my name listed as one of the people that were in charge of organizing that from year 1. And my last year with them was 1990. They started in 85. In 1990, I stopped organizing it. I still attended a few, but I just got burned out from being a professional volunteer. So.
Are you in any local Vietnam veteran groups?
I am a member of Vietnam Veterans Chapter 279. I'm a member of them.
Is that here in Omaha?
Yes, and the local VFW and an American Legion. And actually, I was a past president of another chapter of the Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 146. They were the first chapter in the Omaha area. They just because of loss of memberships because of old age, they eventually ceased to exist about 15 years ago. But I was their 3rd president when they started in like 82, and there was one guy who was the president for the first couple of years. There's a gentleman that organizes our Monday meetings here. He was the next president in line, and then I followed him as president for a couple of years. So, so yeah, I did my thing.
Have you talked to your children about your military experience?
Actually, no. They kind of learned it firsthand at the reunions. They always had family activities, and the first year was all just veterans. But the second year, through they started having children activities, and I took my kids to them, and
How old were they at the time?
Okay, so
Approximately.
we're talking 86. So Elizabeth, the daughter, is 3. Tom is 8. My other son is 10, and my oldest son is 14 or 12. So 12 through 3. Okay, and so they went up until roughly 17 through 8. They went, and so they would be there, and they would hear the story. I mean, they if you wanted to talk about Vietnam experiences, my oldest son is probably the one that can tell you more than I can, because there was the older kids. He was one of the older kids. They basically went from room to room, listening to the stories and all that, and they know more probably about Vietnam than I might, because of the stuff they hear. They'd be up late at night with seeing the Marines trying to jump off the balcony into the pool, things like that. But the one thing, everybody goes, how can you take your kids? They always had outside activities. And they would take the kids to a skating rink or to the local zoo or wherever. And there's a motorcycle group, the Vietnam Veterans Vietnam Veterans Motorcycle Club, attended every reunion, and they provided all the security for all the children's activities. Anytime the kids went to a skating rink, there was like a half a dozen motorcycles that followed the bus that took them there. And they went to the zoo. The kids be walking around in the zoo. They always had one of these motorcycle guys walking around with them. We didn't worry about what was going to happen to our kids, and then so the kids learned a lot of stuff. And the motorcycle guys would let them hang around their motorcycles at night and talk to them about certain things that were going on. So yeah, I really haven't talked too much about my kids. They know a lot from that 5 or 6 years that they went to that.
Have they ever asked you questions about it?
I don't talk about it. No. They know better. You're asking me more questions than I've ever answered before.
I get paid a lot. Does anything stick out in your mind as the single best day of your time in Vietnam?
Yeah. I was there for 2 weeks. We couldn't do anything waiting for parts for about 3 days. It only took us a couple of days to work on the bird, and it got out of there. We ended up staying a week, waiting for a transport to take us back to Korat. At first there was talk that we weren't going to go back to Korat, we were going to probably go down to Saigon. But there was a lot of heavy stuff going on the outskirts. And they weren't too sure what the heck was going on. And they ended up bringing, and I'm not sure what they're called in the Marines, but they brought 2 units from Korea of Marines to Da Nang and basically help defend the base and make sure all non-essential personnel got on a transport out of there. I was just lucky to get on a transport that went to Korat. So because they were going to Saigon, they were going to the Philippines, they had like 4 different transports. And I was lucky to get the one that was going to Korat.
Were these Korean Marines or U.S. Marines?
U.S. Marines.
Okay.
U.S. Marines.
And if you had to say, did you have something you would describe as the worst day you were in Da Nang? A bad experience?
That was probably the beginning of that day, actually, because there was actually concerns on whether or not, being Air Force, you learn how to fire an M16, but you never touch one again for the rest of your life unless you really need to. And there was times they're saying, hey, Gill, we're going to be giving you something here in a few minutes to hold. And that never happened, But yeah, it's just, I think the day I arrived, I have to admit, when I heard the stuff going on in the distance, I was doing a lot of ducking, And it took me maybe about an hour or two to realize I don't have anything to worry. It's that far out, But at first, you just hear it, and you're not used to hearing it, and you're ducking. But that last day, it was a hell of a lot closer. And I'm not sure if they ever breached the line or not, but it was worrisome enough that they brought in reinforcements, which I guess was a normal thing they did. The Marines would come and spend a week or two and then go back to Korea, but they did that on an ongoing basis. But it was the first time they did it while we were there. So,
What about your entire military experience? What would you say was the worst experience you had? Looking over your entire, and it could be the same day.
I don't know if I can even, my stateside previous to going to Korat was an easy peasy thing. I didn't really have that much to worry about. When I was in the Weasel Squadron, it was, you're talking about worst thing. I met my wife while I was there. I got married while I was there. My first two kids were born while I was there.
You're not defining those as bad.
Huh?
You're not defining those as bad things.
No, that's. But I'm trying to think of the things that happened along. I really don't have anything to complain about during my military career. But I have said it numerous times, and if I don't, I kick myself in the ass every time I think about getting out. I didn't have a reason to get out. I just didn't have a reason to stay in either, if you know what I mean. I didn't start working for the post office until '93. If I would have stayed in, I would have retired at 91. 2 years later, went to work for the post office, and then retired 25 years later from the post office, and have 2 federal retirements. And I'm doing fine, I'm not. But when I look back, I really think how stupid I was for getting out. I really do. And if there's anything bad I can think of, is why did I make that decision? I really didn't have, I wasn't injured. I was never injured. And like I say, it was just that day of me leaving Da Nang. The beginning started out like things could go terrible. And that's probably the scariest I ever was while I was in the military. But I'm not going to say it was bad. It was just, it was there. I really enjoyed the military life, and I kick myself in the ass constantly when I think about getting out. I'm sorry I did.
Did you ever encourage your kids to go into the military?
No.
Were they ever interested?
My middle son was interested in the Marines. He went and talked to him. I didn't encourage him or discourage him. I let him do his thing. I wasn't one of these, a lot of guys, my son's going into the service, my son, I happen to know one guy, his son went into the service and ended up being, passing on while he was over in the Middle East. But I wasn't willing to offer my kids to the gods. I figured I'd do my service, and if push came to shove, I'd go back in if need be before I'd send my kids in. I was just never in that mindset. Now I have a grandson who was in junior ROTC and is right now at a craft school learning to be a diesel mechanic. He's thinking of going into the service, and I couldn't be prouder than, I encourage that. I'm all for that. For some reason, my kids, I was not. So.
You think it was the times, or just?
I would say that as a couple, my wife and I were probably more pro-military than anybody else you could ever think of. Because my wife was a military dependent. Her dad retired a month and a half before we got married. So she was in the military almost all her life, and so to speak. And so we, we weren't afraid of military life, so to speak. For some reason, we just weren't willing to push our kids into it. And I'm not sure if it was the times or not, because if it was the times, I wouldn't have gone in. I mean, August in '71, you got anti-war things going all over the place, including Buffalo, New York. So I don't think the time, for some reason, like I say, I just wasn't willing to offer the gods my kids. And that's how I say it every time. I wasn't willing to offer my kids to the gods. So, you know, and just that way.
But you would have let them go if they had made the choice.
Oh, if they decided, I would have supported them all the way. I wouldn't have encouraged them. If they came and asked me, I'd say, it's your decision. I'm not going to encourage you or discourage you. And that's what I did with my son, who looked at the Marines. I said, you know, if you really want to do this, go ahead and do it. But and I'll support you, but I'm just not going to be the one that pushes you. Nor will I hold you back. So, yeah.
If you had to leave a message for people 50, 100 years from now about Vietnam and your military experience, what would it be?
The people I served with and the things we did, I'm proud of. Not everything was hunky-dory and not everything went according to plan, but for the vast majority of the people, we served with honor. And if there's anything military service should do for people, is teach them how to have honor. I don't care what branch it is. And Vietnam was not overall an honorable situation, but the people that served in it were honorable.
Is there anything you would like to add, or we have two other gentlemen in here would like to ask?
I'd like to ask if you remember spending any of that. I think it's the series is the same time period.
We're
And if you-
passing over, is it MPC or is it Vietnamese money?
Well,
It's
actually,
FBC, and if you do remember,
Military
what did you
paint.
buy?
no,
MPC
we did.
is military
We did
payment.
not have these. Of course, in Thailand, we had baht, and we didn't have military script. Okay, in Vietnam, we didn't have a chance. Well, being there just TDY, we didn't have a chance to do diddly squat. So I did not. I never saw these. People had them, but I never had them. And when you first handed it to me, it almost looked like baht, and that's what the unit of measurement for the money is in Thailand. And that, if you would have showed me some baht, yeah. Baht was usually used downtown.
Well, and so with that being said, I think a neat question is there anything that you brought back that you still have in a drawer, in a box, something, whether it's a shell, whether it's a coin, whether it's a picture? Is there anything that you brought back that's still special to you and brings back a special memory, good or bad?
I still have my unit hat from there. My son in Marshalltown, Iowa, my father-in-law was air rescue and recovery when he was over there, and he left a lot of stuff. And my son has that along with, I wasn't supposed to have him being enlisted, but I had a flight jacket, and he's got the flight jacket too. But I kept the hat, and other than that, no.
Do you have any pictures?
No, pictures were in an album that were in a box in a basement of a house over on near 84th and Center, that when the Papio Creek rose, it came in my basement. And a lot of stuff was, my wife, like I say, was in military dependent, a lot of Portuguese linens and things of that nature were damaged in that nature, in that. My family had a christening gown that was made when my mom was born, and all the grandkids were christening it, and they told, mine was the last one, they said, just hold on to it until we need it next. Well, because of that flood, nobody. So yeah, my pictures were all destroyed.
Because we would ask for copies to include in this for the record.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I don't.
Okay, do you have any other?
Oh, I'm just wondering, from your unit, were you able to maintain contact with any?
Well, it has a Facebook page,
Good.
and they put out they had a reunion about 4 or 5 years ago, and I wasn't able to make it, but I got a reunion T-shirt, and then they put out a challenge coin, and I was able to get a challenge coin, and through Facebook. Unfortunately, there's 2 units. The 561st has two Facebook pages, and I don't recognize the name of any of them. You know, we're going back. That was in '70. I left the unit in '73, so you would think, you know, you wouldn't forget those people's name, but a lot of those, unfortunately, the unit moved to George Air Force Base in '73, and I didn't. And a lot of the people that are in both those groups talk about their experiences at George.
Okay.
And I wasn't at George.
You're talking
That
about
was
the 560
California.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Oh, I thought you were talking about the 561st out of Omaha, which is a reserve
No.
Army group.
No, the 561st Wild Weasels.
Okay.
It was a fighter group out of McConnell Air Force Base at the time. Two-seated fighters.
Wow.
That they were out of McConnell Air Force Base when I was with them, and then when they moved to George, they said, Gill, you don't need to go there. And I think it's Davis Mountain is in South
Yep.
Carolina.
No, Davis Monthan is in Arizona.
No, okay, so Seymour Johnson.
Seymour Johnson is in South Carolina.
Seymour Johnson.
Sumter, South Carolina.
Huh?
Sumter, South
Okay,
Carolina.
Seymour Johnson. They said, Gil, you can stay at McConnell and go into the SAC group, or you can go to Seymour Johnson. And I decided to. Actually, the reason I stayed is because they were leaving 1 July. Yeah, they were leaving 1 July of '73. I was getting married August 11th of '73. So a month and a half later, I was getting married. So I didn't like having to go to South Carolina for a month and a half and then come back and get married. I said, I'll just stay here since I'm getting married here. So.
I'll bet she already asked this, I'm sorry, but going back to when you were drafted or enlisted, were you in a small town, big town, where other...
Buffalo, New York.
Okay, not exactly small.
Yeah, and
Were friends, relatives, high school classmates all got drafted or served with you?
No, as far as I know, at the time, I was the very first person. I enlisted 2 months after our graduation, but I do know 3 other people who eventually did enlist within 6 months after graduation, but I was the first one. Went to a Catholic high school, a lot of liberal-minded people there. So being a military, knowing I was going military wasn't exactly most popular, but
No.
at the other side of the coin, it was okay.
Okay,
So yeah.
thank you. That was it.
No.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate all of it.
I hope it helps. No,
I think that we can stand